welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a dialogue of ideas, different perspectives on key issues that seem to have disappeared from our political and media discourse. Tonight in the NDTV Dialogues, we look at why India's healthcare is in critical condition. Joining me tonight, Dr. Srinath Reddy, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, Dr. Binayak Sen, and Dr. Ashok Seth. Thank you all for coming in tonight. Dr. Reddy, I think everyone agrees that our health parameters are amongst the worst in the world right now. In fact, a child born in India today has less chance of survival than in Nepal or Bangladesh. How do we look at addressing even just this aspect going forward?
Well, it's true that we have had an increase in our life expectancy from the time of independence from 35 years to now 65 years plus. But even this is very unevenly distributed. The life expectancy in Madhya Pradesh is 56 years, whereas in Kerala it is 74 years. And a girl baby born in Madhya Pradesh is 6 times more likely to die before her first birthday as compared to a girl baby born in Kerala. When you look at multiple health indicators, there is huge inequity within the country, but certainly in comparison with other countries in our immediate neighborhood, of course Sri Lanka is way ahead of us, but even in comparison with Nepal and Bangladesh, and in comparison indeed with some of the sub-Saharan African countries, we are lagging far behind in terms of our health indicators. We need to do a lot more in order to ensure, firstly, that the living conditions in which our people will build up their health and not have their health threatened are improved, because health lies beyond health care. But when they do fall ill, or even for preventive and promotive services, we need the services to have outreach, efficiency, and an equity perspective. And if all three are deficient, then we are going to have serious problems in terms of our health indicators, which will also affect our development, because we have a huge human resource loss because of untimely death and disability. And keeping in mind that our growth in the population over the next 2 decades is going to be in the 15 to 59 year segment, if we do not invest adequately in our human resources, we are never going to harness them for development. And even aside from that, health is a human right, and we have to treat it as a right of every individual citizen. And therefore it's absolutely imperative, whether it is child health or maternal health or even elderly care, we need to look at health as an important attribute that we must ensure and protect across the entire life course.
Ms. Shaw, the right to health, this comes, of course, we talk about the 66 years after independence. It seems almost, I don't know whether tragicomic or how you would describe it, but the fact is that it comes in the context of the debate over rights, because we talk about the right to food, the right to education, and there's been a furor about, when we talk about giving rights, is this about elections around the corner? What about the delivery system? If we haven't been able to do this in 66 years, do we need to change our whole method of delivery, the method of thinking, or have we actually left a large part of India behind in this whole obsession with growth, as some would say?
Well, I think, what we are really looking at is how do you build a viable, sustainable model that provides access to every citizen in terms of delivering a decent quality of health care. And as Srinath said, it's not just about health care, it's about just creating a healthy environment. So for instance, when you talk about public health, sanitation plays such an important role in healthcare. Now if you look at it, 50% of our population defecates in the open, and we need to address that. So I think building toilets for our people is a very important part of public health. Now when you look at how are we going to address right to healthcare, certainly I think it is a right. I think we cannot let our people fend for themselves when they fall ill, certainly not the poor. And today, as we know, 80% of healthcare spend happens out of pocket. How can we sustain such a model? Today, the whole debate in the US is about Obamacare, because they also clearly recognize you cannot exclude people in society to fend for themselves at times of illness. And we know in our country that rural illness and rural indebtedness are directly linked. So we can't allow this. So we have to develop a proper sustainable economic model that does provide health care to all. That is the essence of healthcare. Now, it is a challenging, it is a big challenge for the country, because it is a huge economic burden. And how do you then sustain this financial burden in terms of delivering good healthcare? So it does start with preventive healthcare. It does entail, one of the things is we've got a lot of ingredients to develop a good universal healthcare model. Because when you look at intervention in terms of healthcare delivery, it's about drugs, and we are the world's lowest cost producer of generic drugs. So that is a good, starting point for us. Then we do have a large number of primary healthcare centers already set up, although they are not all efficiently functioning, but that is good infrastructure to start with. We do have tertiary care structures, but then we are not connecting the primary healthcare structure system with the tertiary healthcare system adequately. So that's where technology comes in. How do we use telemedicine to really connect them? And telemedicine today is possible with just a handheld device, a tablet. And you don't have to have a dedicated room or something. You can actually, a doctor sitting anywhere can communicate with another doctor in a tertiary care hospital very effectively. So how do we create this whole ecosystem? What is the insurance model? So the reimbursement model. What is the drug, essential drugs is something which we've all been talking about. That has been set up very effectively in certain aspects. And one of the important things is healthcare is not just something that happens through a union policy. It is to be delivered at the state level. So states also get involved in health delivery.
Dr. Sen, as somebody who's actually spent his professional career in areas of Chhattisgarh dealing with children there, when we talk about issues of primary health care, etc., often we talk about it from an academic perspective. You've actually been there, seen how it actually functions on the ground. What do you think needs to actually change the most? Is it about sending more funds? We've had even the President of India saying that the ratio of GDP in health spending must rise. Is it about a change in mindset? When we talk about healthcare or policy, do we look too often at healthcare for the rich? What actually needs to change?
Well, the Committee on the Social Determinants of Health, I think Dr. Srinath Reddy already mentioned this, talked about equity and said that inequity is killing people on a grand scale. That is absolutely true for India. Inequity is killing people on a grand scale. Before we come to healthcare, when we are talking about health, we have to look at the fact that there are large subsets of the Indian population which are permanently existing in a chronic stable famine, that malnutrition is existing constantly, not only among children but also among adults. In children, among all the deaths that occur below the age of 5 years, half of all the deaths are associated with malnutrition in some way or the other. So half of all the deaths that occur among children below 5 years have to do with malnutrition. In adults, if you look at the proportion of the population according to the National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau, the proportion of the population that exists below a body mass index of 18.5, which is commonly held to be indicative of chronic malnutrition. If you look at the tribal areas, more than 40% of the men and 49% of the women have a body mass index below 18.5. Overall, the Indian population, Indian adult population, 36% of the total Indian adult population have a body mass index below 18.5. World Health Organization says that any community in which 40% of the people have a body mass index below 18.5 should be regarded as a community in famine. By that criterion, large sections of the Indian population are living in a state of famine, chronically living in a state of famine. Now that has important consequences for the entire healthcare system, because, for instance, if you look at the number of deaths occurring from tuberculosis annually, the number of deaths occurring due to tuberculosis has gone up 5 times in 10 years. Okay. Now this is something that has very bad portents for the future of the Indian population. I think now colleagues are trying to do that, but the point is that we are not able to make sufficient as allocations. I think that the idea that we don't have the Planning Commission has reneged on the commitment to the recommendations of its own committee, high-level expert group, which for universalization of healthcare, because on the grounds that headed by Dr. Reddy, which on the grounds that we didn't have enough resources. That's a useless argument, because we are giving tax breaks of 5 lakh crore rupees. We are giving non-performing assets to the corporate sector to the scale of, and we can't afford healthcare for to go from 1% of the GDP to 3% of the GDP. This is ridiculous.
No, in fact, I'll come back to Kiran Sharma, because I think this whole fighting something about what GDP, how much spending we should raise where. But what I wanted to ask Dr. Ashok Seth, because that point raised just now is that, of course, that 80% of healthcare now comes from the private system. Yet, we talk about public-private partnership in this area, but there is some level of disconnect, and activists say it's almost an obscene disconnect when you have breakthroughs in the field of, say, cancer, breakthroughs in the field of the most complex surgeries in the world. Yet, the number of people who are dying of tuberculosis, the fact that over 200 children will die of encephalitis in badly staffed hospitals with not even basic facilities. Yet for dengue here or an issue, or even if it's a hand, foot, mouth disease, there'll be much more of an outcry, whether it's in national media, whether it's in the resources of our doctors. How do you reconcile this?
You see, they're not mutually exclusive. And I think that we want to understand this very clearly. Let me just give you my perspective of this before we move forwards. Even when I was in medical school, you'd be surprised to know that at that time we were taught, this is 35 years ago, that one Australia was getting added to India every year. And we therefore developed into a nation of 1.2 billion. So we start looking bad on every parameter of healthcare delivery, whether you call it doctor per 10,000 patients or bed per 1,000 patients. That's because we have this. And we look the worst in terms of emerging economies, even including Brazil and so on, so forth. But the real issue is that this universal health care for all is a lovely byline, it's a lovely motto. But I always start thinking that when 80% of our population lives in the villages, at least not in the urban areas, then sanitation, hygiene, food, proper water supply is all that is required to upgrade the health, so that they don't even come to the health status issues, and that is not being provided. So let alone our whole discussion on numerous issues about this byline of universal healthcare for all, because then we talk about it's not just universal, it has to be quality healthcare for all. It's got to be value medicine for all, and that is far away from what we visualize. There are numerous hurdles in its way. Coming to the role, private and public is a much bigger issue, and I'll tell you why I say they're not mutually exclusive. If we understand healthcare delivery in this country, and now I'm talking about healthcare, not health of the country, which I think the government should be taking care of. Food, sanitation, and Dr. said as well, just worse this, that even if we upgraded those basic amenities to our poor in the villages, we would upgrade health. But when we come to the single fact that while 70% of the population lives in villages and there are only 30% beds there, and there is 70% of beds available to 30% of the population in this country, we're looking at private being a partner to what is provided, a healthcare provider in this country. When we think that only 1.5% GDP came from the government and the remaining 4% came from the private players, when we talk about what sort of facilities exist in the public versus private hospitals, then we know
subsidized land came from public.
Yeah, in many instances, but in many instances it did not. But the same government hospitals which developed were not unfortunately able to provide numerous of those facilities where quality healthcare should come in. So when we talk about saying a district hospital which has all the government proposals to it, all the government facilities to it, is it actually providing quality healthcare? And quality healthcare is not expensive healthcare. It's a process-driven healthcare. It's an ethical healthcare. It is based on evidence-based practices, and it is auditable healthcare. And there doesn't lie in any expertise. So when we talk about a quality healthcare, unfortunately, it's one of the easiest healthcare to deliver in terms of expertise, which is moderate level of expertise, in terms of actually having processes in terms of having evidence-based medicine, in terms of having value medicine, and value medicine is cost-efficient medicine, and that's where the patient benefits and the government benefits, and yet we don't see that existing. So I think that we can keep on discussing these two sides, but I actually find it very odd that private healthcare providers are not seen as partners, but as people who are actually fleecing the population away. And yet we must not forget that if only the trust lay between the government and the private players, we would actually create the milieu, at least one of the milieus, which could help delivery of universal health care.
How can that actually happen? Because there is a level of distrust. I mean, there's of course court cases on specifically in Delhi over this public land being used and free beds not being given. But how do we create that trust? And we know, of course, in hospitals like AIIMS, and many private hospitals hire doctors from AIIMS because you've got good quality doctors, and they pay them high salaries and they're welfare. How do we create that trust?
Firstly, let me correct Ashok on a particular point. If we are talking about 4.5% of the GDP being spent on health and 1% comes from the government, the remaining 3.5% is out-of-pocket expenditure. People are paying for it, and they're getting impoverished in that process. 60 million Indians are crushed into poverty each year because of unaffordable healthcare costs, and the private sector is a significant contributor to that problem. Even in a well-developed...
But government is also abdicating.
Sure. I'm not saying that. I mean, it is a responsibility of the entire society.
Yes.
And even in a well-developed state like Gujarat, there was a survey done between 2001 and 2010, Anirudh Krishna from Duke University. 88% of those who became poor attributed it to unaffordable healthcare costs. So it's a major cause of impoverishment. And apart from looking at water, sanitation, nutrition and environment as the key social determinants, we have to strengthen primary health care. And in primary health care, the private sector has not shown much appetite for entry. The government has taken up the responsibility, but it has not delivered effectively. We do need the private sector, but as a responsible partner. You see, we cannot think of controlling tuberculosis and multi-drug resistant tuberculosis in this country without engaging the private doctors, because they are the people actually seeing the largest number of patients. On the other hand, the private sector has to come in responsibly through contracted arrangements to deliver a set of well-defined services for which they can get paid, but with accountability. See, when we talk of public-private partnerships, let us not forget the public purpose. I would like to redefine the PPP as a partnership with a public purpose. Then both the sides, or even any number of partners who are engaged in it, should have their deliverables clearly defined and accountability affixed. So we need a regulatory framework in which all the resources available to society, whether it is the public sector, the private sector, the voluntary sector, all of them should be able to work together in order to deliver the services that are required. But first and foremost, primary health services must be strengthened both in rural and urban areas. It is no use boasting that we have wonderful tertiary care services, we are getting medical tourism, if our primary services are abysmal.
I would say that the primary and secondary care services.
Primary and secondary
care services.
Secondary too.
And I think that's only going to have, the trust is still the biggest issue. And I totally agree with Dr. Srinath Reddy. Accountability on either sides, but yet creating a milieu which is positive and a win-win. At the end, the winner is the patient, and yet the stakeholders have to sit around the table and understand where are the reservations, where are the apprehensions, and what can be done in a transparent manner to create the best for everyone together.
I'd like to just bring in Ms. Shaw on an aspect perhaps more specific to the industry you work in as well, and that's you just mentioned generic drugs. Now that Supreme Court verdict wasn't welcomed by many manufacturers because they felt that it hindered the cause of research. Yet world over, India has been hailed, the countries like Africa, even countries like America have hailed India for that Supreme Court judgment. Do you think that was a judgment which was actually progressive and needed when you're looking at regulating costs in the health industry?
See, I think we have to look at this ruling in very different ways. One is, there's no doubt about it that generic drugs are actually helping the whole world address this whole challenge of unaffordable healthcare. And India is playing a very key role in helping countries to actually address these financial challenges that the healthcare systems have. And today, even a country like America actually finds that 80% of its prescriptions are generic drugs, and India alone enjoys 30% of that share. Now, I think generic drugs per se are extremely important for this country. I think the debate that we are having is about the drugs that were basically, allowed by the Supreme Court in terms of patent aspects of the drug that the drug enjoyed, and basically we are looking at compulsory licensing. I think India has done very well to say that we will not recognize evergreening of patents, because that basically delays the genericization of drugs. But I think to suddenly, usurp patent rights of companies on the basis of affordability, when many of these drugs that we're talking about are really not drugs that most poor people can afford, even at the prices at which they are selling. So I think merely to just look at affordability as the reason for invoking compulsory licensing is not quite fair on the companies who have actually spent a lot of money developing them. Government also can be a responsible player in this particular aspect by actually bulk procuring these drugs and then giving it and making it available. So the kind of patients who really need to be treated with such drugs are fewer than what the larger disease, the metabolic diseases are all about.
But for instance, Bill Gates recently said at conference when, of course, he released those mosquitoes in front of a whole packed delegation, saying that that the international drug industry looks more, say, anti-baldness drugs rather than looking at developing a cheap, affordable anti-malaria drug. The issue of priorities, whether it comes from the drug industry, whether it comes from private hospitals, whether it comes from NGOs, when we look at how to look at the healthcare problem of India as not divided into, say, rural India or urban India, but looking at a holistic system, do you think we all fail on that, whether it's in media discourse, whether it's in public discourse?
I think that there is one aspect of the overall culture in India which impacts directly on health, which we are not, which is prior to much of the discussion that has happened, and that is, I had earlier talked about equity, inequity, and about what is getting left out is violence. I think violence is one aspect of the situation. India is what we do not, I don't know how many of us realize it, but India is one of the most violent societies in the world. And there is an idea that women and children and old people are only become victims of violence by a process of collateral damage. That is not true. Much of the people are the hungry people whom I talked about. These people are enabled to survive because of their access to common pool resources. And when their access to common pool resources is compromised, then their survival is put at risk. And India is a situation. The state in India is in a massive process of expropriation of common pool resources, handing these resources over to corporate entities. Okay, and now the people who suffer most as a result of these factors are not the combatants. The people who suffer most are the vulnerable section of the population, that is women, children and old people. We also need to look at female feticide and infanticide. I mean, these female feticide and infanticide are taking on demographic proportions. These are not individual criminal acts anymore. These are demographic. So
Prime Minister called it a national shame, especially for female feticide.
Yeah. So this is an important aspect that we need to address. Once we put those aside, if we look at healthcare, see the corporate. We had this very eminent cardiothoracic surgeon in the planning commission, the steering committee, who said that in the 20th century, industry was the engine of the economy. In the 21st century, healthcare is going to be the engine of the economy. Now, so corporate entities have a different logic from the logic of public provisioning. Public provisioning has to, primary health care can only take place as a result of public provisioning. Now we can we can take it as part of the democratic functioning at the peripheral level. Half of our population, almost half of our population, at least 40% of our population is today urban. So this rural-urban distinction has now become an artificial one. We have to look at the entire population as a whole, and we have to develop patterns of primary health care, including patterns, including mandatory standard treatment protocols, which would have the force of law.
In that aspect, when you say an atmosphere of trust needs to be built up, what would corporate healthcare, what would hospitals like yours do to reduce that trust? I mean, there's so many proposals. Why don't private doctors actually go and voluntarily volunteer in areas of where there are no doctors? How does private healthcare build up that trust where they're not seen as fleecing patients?
Right. And on the other side, how does the private healthcare have a trust in the government so that they don't see that as a red tapeism or slow or inefficient services? In fact, when you look at the primary healthcare, and we just discussed the primary healthcare, we pointed out that the primary healthcare is a huge area to be strengthened. We know that can happen through numerous, regulations. The problem is that the stakeholders, all the stakeholders, don't come and sit around the table to actually discuss and finalize the proposals which will actually have continuous input of everyone. Decisions are made arbitrarily through groups of people without actually thinking through who's actually going to be the stakeholder and how do they execute the stakeholder and therefore create trust. For example, when I think of primary health care, and we talk about doctors going to the primary health care, yes, legislations can actually be put forth. We are actually talking about literally equal number of private medical colleges versus the government medical colleges which produce doctors, and yet one thinks that the loads of fee which is charged by the private medical colleges should all be abolished into a uniform standardized methodology whereby the government says, okay, let's actually just make sure that there's a medical education in the system at a particular cost, but then a legislation that every doctor would spend time out into the community, into the primary care centers, but also at the same time upgrade the primary care centers so that these doctors who actually studied there can actually practice a level of care which transfers into somebody getting better. Unfortunately, those services do not exist. So we just can't strengthen it by doctors. We have equal number of Ayush workers that we produce every year, 30,000 Ayush workers, and we have to rely on our systems of medicines which have been traditional and which have been sound. Let us try and use them again into the primary services. The private sector is keen on coming into this secondary care services. That's also been seen much more recently. And again, guidelines and frameworks have to be developed where specific costs and specific treatments and specific charges for treatments can certainly be put down on an infrastructure which can be created both together, so that at the end of the day, if we are creating value medicine for the patient, and value medicine is not the top post techniques and expertise and equipment, it relates to what do you actually give the patient most cost efficient care at what cost. And the government would be very happy if the partnership revolves around cost efficient care in the best possible manner so that the patient gets better. The models can be numerous, but the framework is no profit making. Profiteering to the extent that it becomes a viable option and the patient benefits.
In fact, Dr. Reddy, that may be one interesting proposal, but just to also present two case studies, for instance. One was, of course, the recent tragedy in Bihar where we had children dying of food poisoning, also because they didn't get medical treatment in time to save their lives, over 20. Then you have a recent order passed which says that bureaucrats can go abroad under CGHS and get facilities abroad. When we have people coming in from abroad here to India to get facilities, we know it was already available for politicians. But the way we look at healthcare and what's available, the contrast, forget about the inequity existing in the system, but the inequity of what different kinds of people, the right to care that they can get. Is that really part of the issue? When you argued for universal healthcare, did you buy the government reason for turning it down as lack of funds?
Well, I do not accept the lack of funds as an excuse, because I think there is a great opportunity to increase the amount of funds available for healthcare. There are a number of other subsidies which are being given which can actually be curtailed, and funds should flow into healthcare. And that is something that health and healthcare, I mean, all the social determinants as well. But coming to the specific instances that you cited, firstly, I think it is absolutely unacceptable that our primary healthcare services should function poorly. We need geographical access, we need adequate infrastructure, we need appropriate staffing, availability of drugs and equipment round the year. And for this, I think
Round the clock as well.
And for this, not only the center should spend, but also the state should start spending much more. And both of them should actually ensure together that the primary health services are strengthened. And there should be local accountability as well. I was in Rwanda just a month ago. There, the primary health centers are staffed and supervised by nurses. Doctors are not needed. And the whole bevy of community health workers who actually span out, one community health worker for every 500 people. And interestingly, the mayors, the members of parliament, the local administration are all held accountable for infant mortality, maternal mortality, for also immunization coverage rates. Now, that is the level of community monitoring and accountability that's really required if we want our services to function effectively. And we need to build a continuum of care between primary, secondary and tertiary. Ashok is absolutely right. Secondary is also the missing element. We need to strengthen our district hospitals as well as bring in private sector as a responsible partner where required. But that whole continuum is there, because unless primary health services are strengthened and act as a gatekeeper, you will get a lot of potentially preventable disease spilling over into expensive secondary and tertiary care, and our healthcare costs will keep piling up. So I think there is a great opportunity of looking at resource mobilization through increased taxes on cigarettes. BDs are not taxed, for example, at the rate they should be. There are a number of ways of resource mobilization, and also increasing the allocative and expenditure efficiency to improve primary health care services and building this continuum. Secondly, I think it is totally unacceptable when the Prime Minister of this country can choose to get operated in All India Institute of Medical Sciences for a second bypass surgery, that we should have our civil servants going abroad. I mean, that is something that I personally find it rather surprising as a concession being made. But the point that you have underlined is there is a huge inequity, and that inequity must be bridged. And even in urban primary health care, now that the Urban Health Mission is there, we must ensure that primary health care is strengthened, and it need not be doctor dependent. We know from global experience and even some Indian experience that much of the primary health care functions can be performed by trained nurses, trained community health workers, and intermittent physician supervision, if available, is good, but you don't have to hold primary health care hostage to the availability of a reluctant doctor.
In fact, Kiran, I think nobody would argue about we would all want universal health care for all, but there are still huge questions about whether the government putting in more funds is really the answer, because of the fact that the delivery mechanisms have been so poor in the recent, wherever we've seen. Some states have worked, of course, like Tamil Nadu has done well, Kerala has done well. But do you believe that another right to health is the answer?
Well, you can't debate the fact that everyone needs right to health. I mean, that's absolutely not up for debate at all. But I think what we need to understand is, look, there are several, reports that tell you that if you have a healthy country, if people are healthy, it actually will add to GDP and economic development. Just now I think Dr. Sen said that, look, if you really look at health and nutrition per se, and if you actually address just that, then you know that this has a direct impact on economic development, because you don't want undernourished people who can't perform. Now that is a big challenge that we have.
The corporate India doesn't say raise funding for health. No, we have many other demands. It's never a corporate India saying raise funding for health.
No, I think there is a certain recognition that right to health is as important as all the other rights that we are addressing. So I think that is, as someone from corporate India, I would clearly say that right to health care is a very important right for this country. I think it's also very important that we look at the resource allocation to this very important sector, and this resource allocation for healthcare starts with public health, sanitation, nutrition, all the way up to the healthcare that we are talking about. And I think here there is a model that has to be developed where private sector can be enrolled into delivering healthcare. Now, I think we do need to make sure that there is a political will to ensure healthcare for all. That is still missing. I think the state has a very important role to play, the center has a very important role to play. Some states actually have made it happen. You know, if you look at what Tamil Nadu has done with its healthcare, system and how it has delivered on health for all, compare it to what Kerala has done, even what states like Rajasthan has done. But many states have not done that. They don't even bother to invest so much in healthcare. So I think there is inequity all around. There is inequity in terms of how we look at delivering health to our people. There is inequity in terms of how different states are delivering healthcare to its people. So I think we need to replicate models that are working. I mean, if you think that the Tamil Nadu healthcare model is working very well, then why not try and scale that up? If you think that the Kerala healthcare system is a very good model to follow, or if there is a combination that you need to do between what different states are doing, do it, but scale it up. You can't suddenly have one state totally, denied access to healthcare, and then the other state providing a very good healthcare system for its people.
The final round of the dialogue tonight, Dr. Vinayak, on the issue of political will. Why is it that healthcare is not on the political agenda of, say, the key stakeholders in these next elections? You just had Narendra Modi saying toilets before temples. Jairam Ramesh said, well, I've been saying that for a while. You may hear these stray references to sanitation, health, etc. But what wins elections still seems to be about religion, caste, etc. Why? You come from a state like Chhattisgarh, you work there. Why do you think health is not a major issue in an election?
I think that health is not a major issue because people don't see it as an issue which can be articulated by the sections of the voters who count within inverted commas. Those sections of the voters who count, who can articulate their entitlements in the face of overall demand patterns. I think that that is not happening, and so health is being seen as a kind of concession that is being made by the government. Among the all the other important functions that they perform, this is another function which a welfare function that government is performing as a kind of a concession to the demands of the people. I think that people have to realize that these patterns of inequity and violence that we have talked about, we cannot have a viable, sustainable society in which these patterns of inequity and violence are perpetuated. I think that is something that people need to realize, and that there is no way out of recognizing these entitlements. That it's not just a matter of votes or a matter of whose forces are stronger in the market. Unless there is equity, unless there is justice, unless there is peace, we will not be able to survive as a society. I think this is something that we need to understand.
Even today, if you look at the political rhetoric, not once has healthcare been mentioned so far. Yet there are states that have won elections based on promises on healthcare.
In fact, in Andhra Pradesh, late Y. Rajshekhar Reddy attributed his re-election to this healthcare initiative. But let me give you one positive news. It's been shown that in panchayats which are headed by women, the expenditure on water, sanitation and health is much better in terms of actual allocation and utilization than in panchayats which are traditionally headed by men. Therefore, the 33% reservation has paid off in some ways, and I think we do need more women, less feticide, more women and more women leaders. But I think the lesson is also decentralization. We need more decentralization and local accountability.
We need to, in fact, decentralization, I agree totally with that, but we also need to give more recognition to the democratic processes at the periphery, rather than just looking at legislatures and what they do.
Well, there's one important point that I believe is very important, and it's getting missed out in all our discussions, is that while there's a section of our population which requires free health care, the advancements of science and technology which are happening, and I said earlier on that these are not mutually exclusive, that while we look at malaria and malnutrition, we cannot forego the fact that advancements in science and technology have to be made available. The issue is that every advancement of science and technology as we see it comes at a cost, and our job now in the country is how does it become available to common man at an affordable cost. And missing out this affordable cost business, because while we may talk about free health care, we know that free health care for all in a quality-based manner, taking into account the advancements of science also, is not practical. United States, UK, all withered in under the issue of free health care, and yet even our teaching institutions like All India Institute of Medical Sciences and GV Pant, there is an issue about affordable. There are patients who charge some amount of money which is affordable to them. We need to scale down from the private sector to a mid-path which says, let's get around the table and talk about affordable healthcare. There's a whole population of middle class who it's okay for them to actually pay for, say, a complex angioplasty technique, 50,000. But what would be impossible for them is to pay 3 lakhs. Now there are ways to get to that, and the ways to get to that to create milieu of innovations, create milieu of frugal innovations, create a sector which develops innovative technologies.
Economies of scale itself
yes,
an option for
create sectors which actually develop these, give these important advantages in milieu of creation, of research, of academics, of thought processes. Let's have what they do in the West right here, and let's create an encouraging milieu for every aspect, be it low-cost innovation strategies, be it zones which are tax-free zones of creating these very technologies from outside within this country. Let us actually believe that we could actually do it together to provide affordable healthcare. And if the motto is affordable healthcare to all, it is achievable. If we actually talk about free healthcare for all, then even the government will not be able to sustain any form of business model. And that is what my biggest concern about all this is.
I totally agree.
I don't agree with that.
I think there is
I think that we need to get into a, you see, the high-level expert group talked about universal access to healthcare, and it's important that it should be universal. That means it should be available to everybody on a cashless basis. That we see this. I think that we do have enough resources as a country. We do have enough resources to fund a universal healthcare.
Let me put it this way. Not only the World Health Organization chief, but the World Bank chief, Jim Kim, in the World Health Assembly in May, said user fee is both unfair and inefficient, and it punishes the poor, it shuts the door on the poor. The question is, if you are actually efficient in collecting your taxes, and the government has not been, then the taxation itself is a progressive measure in which everybody contributes through the taxes to their own health care. But employer provided insurance also can be additional element. But at this point in time, as primary services, emergency services at least must be ensured to every single citizen, and nobody should be able to really search in his pocket before approaching for an important healthcare need. So that is where we actually said universal is a principle in which everybody is entitled to a certain level of services, because services that are designed only for the poor as a matter of charity will never actually be properly designed or delivered.
Exactly.
So everybody should have a stake in the system.
Yeah.
And the reason why United States is actually in trouble is because before the Obamacare, their costs were escalating. And why did they actually introduce it? Because with 15% of their GDP was going into healthcare, and General Motors was bankrupted because of healthcare costs of the workers. It was more of a healthcare industry with automobiles as an ancillary. So that is the reality. We can't afford our healthcare costs to pile up. We have to contain them, and the answer is strengthen primary healthcare, judiciously use secondary and tertiary care. And I agree with Ashok that we need modern science. Modern science and basic health services are not mutually exclusive, but the reality is, in terms of healthcare, India exists simultaneously in 5 centuries. We must ensure that the 21st century is a century where we all unify in 1 century rather than spread across 5 centuries.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to end this dialogue with tonight. Thank you all very much for joining me. Hopefully this will be a political issue in these elections and top priority for the next government as well. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining me tonight. Thank you.